Welcome to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. In this episode, I'm joined by Ben Smith. Ben overcame bullying, mental health struggles, and 2 suicide attempts to run 401 marathons in 401 days, raising lots of money along the way for anti-bullying causes. So welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much.
Could you tell us a bit about your early life, as you were growing up?
I suppose I had a pretty normal life growing up to start with, or normal to a degree in the fact that I was born into a military family. I was very lucky to travel the world, immerse myself in lots of different cultures, learn a few different languages. Both my parents, they were very supportive of both me and my brother. And the early years for me were basically an adventure. I think going back to what I was saying about my parents, they didn't instill in me this thing of kind of materials. They said to me, the whole point in life is about being happy. And it doesn't really matter what that looks like. It's all individual for everybody. So growing up, having the adventure, traveling the world, having those values instilled in me were just, it was great. I had a brother. He joined me a couple of years later. And I'm sure quite a few of the people listening to this that have siblings will understand what that's like. It's not always great, but we had a lovely relationship. We fought a lot. We played a lot. We had an adventure. But then my whole life changed when I got to the age of 10. My dad, he got a promotion. He was in the RAF. He ended up working for NATO. And, this was the early 90s. And back then, you picked your life up, the whole family, and you moved to wherever it was they told you to go. And this time it was out to NATO headquarters in Germany. And been out to Germany before, lived in Germany. I enjoyed the place. It was in a big American Air Force base. But when we got out there, we realised that there wasn't any schooling for British kids after the age of 10. So my mum and dad had to make a very difficult decision. And one I think they probably weren't prepared at the time to make. And that was to send me away to school. This was 1992. Harry Potter didn't exist. And I suppose I didn't really know what boarding school was. It was never something we'd ever discussed as a family. But I suppose I treated it like I treated everything else, an adventure.
And this was in the UK, was it? You were sent to boarding school in the UK?
Yeah, so I had to go, I got on a plane at Frankfurt and flew across to Manchester, and then I got in a taxi on my own, which you would never ever do nowadays. And I got driven, across the Pennines and put in a school in the middle of Sherwood Forest. So, it was an environment I wasn't prepared for. It was an environment I wasn't used to experiencing, shall we say.
How did you adapt to that then?
Well, I think I got inbuilt behaviours anyway. I think I was quite resilient growing up, and I knew my own mind, and I suppose I treated a lot of things like an adventure. So that's, I suppose, how I got through the initial parts of it. But I suppose the first few weeks at this school, it became quite apparent that I wasn't going to get on at this school. A lot of the kids that I went to school with, they were very different to me. Going back to what I was saying before, I've been instilled with, it's not about money, it's not about materials, it's about what you can bring to the world. Whereas a lot of the kids I went to school with, it was all about how much money their parents earned, or the types of cars that they got, or the latest skiing holiday they'd been on. And remember, this was 1992, the latest laptop. Not everybody had one back then. And I think because it was so material driven, for me, it was almost like we spoke 2 very different languages. Not literally, but figuratively. And that point of difference, that's what started it. I suppose I could bat off what they were saying to me initially, which was I wasn't good enough, or was something wrong with me, just because I was a little bit different to them. And I battered it off. But when somebody's saying something to you consistently, and there's nobody on the other side actually saying it's okay to be that and do that and think that way, it gets you. And the crazy thing is it creeps up on you. And that's what happened to me. Went from being this really outgoing kid to being this really shy and reclusive kid, all in the space of probably about a month, and all just because I was a little bit different. And it was tough. I didn't enjoy my time at school. A lot happened and a lot went on, but it was a difficult time.
And what happened as you got older then? Going to your teenage years, you've got all sorts of things happening to you, to all teenagers at that time. How did that impact on your school life?
Good old teenage years, eh? The joyous years of anybody's life. Hormones everywhere. And just, I think for me, a lot of the damage had been done ahead of my teenage years. My confidence was rock bottom. My self-esteem wasn't there. And I think for me, then going into kind of all those changes and that you go through when you're a teenager and wanting to fit in and not wanting to stand out from the crowd, I think for me, a lot of it was exacerbated because of what had happened. And then at 13, for me, I actually realised that I was a little bit different to these kids at school. I actually realised that I was gay. And again, this was 1995, a very different world to what 2024, dare we say, obviously, what with everything going on at the moment, but a very different world back then. And my school, it had a very defined viewpoint on sexuality. It didn't exist. Straight was the only option. Anything outside of that was wrong. And if you think as a kid who had no confidence or self-esteem anyway, because it had been knocked out of him, to suddenly be told that who he is through no choice of his own, it almost was like, I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to be this person. I just want to fit in. I just want to just be me.
So you were bullied, I'm guessing then.
Yeah, I think initially it wasn't, my bullying wasn't initially driven down the route of sexuality. I think that came later on. I never came out at school. I never experienced anything. I think for me, the bullying initially was because I was a bit different. I didn't speak how other kids spoke, or I didn't have the clothes that they had or the technology that they had. So that was what the bullying was driven towards. The damage was done off the back of that because you don't want to be told every single day that who you are is wrong. Then obviously when the sexuality side of things started to kick in at 13, I didn't want to be that either. So I put on a face, I pretended to be what everyone else wanted me to be, and I got really good at it. Hid it because I thought that's the only thing I could do to survive.
Did you share how you were feeling with anybody?
No, not at all. No, I was too scared to. And I suppose the internalized homophobia that I felt about myself was huge. When the whole world is saying around you that who you are is wrong, it's horrible. It's horrible because it's not like it's a choice. Who would choose that? Yeah, I think I hated myself for a lot of my teenage years, to be honest with you, probably for a lot of my 20s and late 20s, because that's the only way that I felt that I could exist.
When you left the school, if you're 16 or 18, when you left, did you feel that was an opportunity to have a new life or turn your back on that, or was the damage done and it was difficult to start afresh?
Yeah, a lot of people say, don't they, that when you do leave school or you go off to university, it's where you start to find yourself and you figure it all out then, don't you? But I think for me, the damage had been done. And in order to find yourself, you've got to know where you're starting. And for me, I didn't even have that. I was a shell when I was 18 and going off to university, doing a degree I didn't want to do. I didn't want to go to university, but I felt like I needed to because I spent most of my school life trying to please people because I didn't want them to be horrible to me. So when somebody said I should go to uni, I went, and yeah, I didn't want to go, but you get caught up on this conveyor belt of life and what's expected of you, shall we say.
And how did it manifest itself? What symptoms did you start to experience? Because you've had this trauma, for want of a better word, and it must have been affecting your mental health. How was that presenting itself in every day?
I think you learn to live with it. You learn to almost try and survive. That's probably the only way I can explain it. So what the world outside sees versus what's actually going on inside you, you get very good at putting that face on and showing people what you want. And I think we're all responsible for that. And I think we've all had instances in our lives where that's been the case. But that's how I lived my life from 10 all the way through to 29 years old. What everyone else saw was not what was going on in here. At 18, I made a decision. I made a decision that I didn't want to feel the way I felt anymore. I didn't want to be here anymore. And I tried to take my own life when I was 18. It was an intent. It wasn't a cry for help. I didn't see any way out. I just didn't want to feel how I felt anymore. And a lot of people talk about suicide as being an act of, a selfish act. And the crazy thing is that if anything, it was completely the opposite. Thought that if I wasn't here and if I didn't have to go through the things that I was going through, then everyone else around me would be far better off. And it's completely illogical. But you know what? If you think I've been living my life in that way for 8 years, there was no logic at all. It was all emotional. There was no rational thinking whatsoever.
Did you get help after that?
No. This was the turn of the century. So again, a very different world to how it is today. And I think I did tell my parents. I told my parents what had happened, and that actually ended up with me being taken out of school, homeschooled for the last 3 months of my A-levels, and I came out with a C and an E in maths and physics. What was the irony? Going to school so my education wouldn't suffer, and then obviously all of that had suffered. My whole mental health had suffered. It was just, but we don't get a crystal ball, do we? We do the best job we can. So I think for me, at 18, I was completely lost. I wasn't like what you're told at 18. You should know what you want to do with the rest of your life. What's your career going to be? Where you're going to go? What your aspirations and wants and objectives. I got no idea at 18. No idea. And I think it's okay to have no idea. But for me, I think on top of all of that, mentally, I wasn't right.
But you had so from what you're saying, you had another decade of this, though.
Yeah. And again, it's funny, isn't it? How we just go along with things, shall I say. I went to uni. I did a psychology degree, which I'm sure the irony is not lost on any of the listeners. And I found out that I was extremely dyslexic as well at university. They tested me in a way that kind of made me feel a bit better, because I spent most of my school years thinking I was thick because I didn't fit into the system. And again, neurodiversity wasn't talked about how it's talked about today. It's again very different in 2000. So at uni, doing this course I didn't want to do, struggling with it, I got myself into a bad crowd of people, started to drink and smoke and take drugs, and where I thought I was finding myself, where I thought I was, figuring out who I was, in fact, it was the opposite. I was falling deeper and deeper into depression, and there was nobody there to grab my hand and pull me out. And it was actually in my first year of uni that I decided that I didn't want to be here again, and I tried to take my own life. I took an overdose and ended up in hospital having my stomach pumped, which is not where you want to be. That was a cry for help. That wasn't an intent. It wasn't that I didn't want to be here. I just needed somebody to help me, and I thought I'd be in the hospital, they'd look after me, and they didn't. The system was broken up there at the time, and for me, they looked at me like I was wasting their time. I got a 15-minute appointment with a psychiatrist the following day, because I think that was quite standard at the time, and I'd faked it for 8 years. I faked it with a psychiatrist, and I actually walked out with a clean bill of health. Nothing was wrong with me. And I think at that point, I just went, these are obviously the cards I've been dealt in life, and I need to get on with it. And it was almost like my brain just clicked. And I thought, it was almost like I went into survival mode. Does that make sense? And that's how the rest of my life then, up until about 29 years old, went. It was just about surviving.
What led up to, a turning point in your life then?
Well, I saw uni out, and I ended up back at home. Quite a lot of debt, bit of a drug and alcohol problem. So real step forward on life's plan. Yeah, that's a straight line of life. And my daddy sits me down and says, son, you need to get a job. And I was like, thanks, Dad, inspiring. And I got a job in retail. No, nothing wrong with retail. Was it what I wanted to do? Not really, but it was a step out. It was an opportunity to do something different. So I started on a graduate management course, working for a company called Arcadia, which was the old Top Man and Top Shops. And I managed stores around the country. During that time with the company, I met a girl and I fell in love, which is probably going to be quite confusing to quite a few people on this, listening to this. And 18 years ago, moved to Bristol, which is where I live now. And the girl that I was with at the time, she worked for a big FTSE 100 company. And if you think back to my schooling, if you could get a job at one of these companies, you have made it, right? Because they give you all the money in the world. And what will that money do? That money will give you happiness and success, mortgage, nice cars, nice holidays, all that stuff that supposedly really matters. And at the time, obviously, I thought it did because that's what I'd been taught. So I left retail. I got a job at this company. I worked my way from the bottom to the top, and I was on a lot of money. Golden handcuffed final salary pension scheme. They don't exist anymore. And I think on paper, my life was great. But one day, sat at my computer, the only way I can describe it is I blinked. And when I opened my eyes, I couldn't see. I lost my sight, disappeared. It was like looking into oil on the top of water, that like shimmery kind of effect. So I could make out outlines, but it was like somebody was screaming in your ear when you get that ringing in your ear. And then I lost my hearing. And then it was like I'd been sat on my hand for about 20 minutes. I got pins and needles in my hands, and it worked its way up my arm and into my chest and then down the left-hand side of my body. And I knew I had a left-hand side, but I couldn't feel it. I couldn't move it. And obviously you freak out because this doesn't happen every day. So my colleague, she goes online, NHS Direct, starts asking me loads of questions. Probably not the best thing to do. 15 minutes later, comes up saying, ring an ambulance. So they did. I got blue lighted through to the BRI, the Bristol Royal Infirmary, where they diagnosed me at 29 years old with having had a stroke. And when somebody says that to you, it's quite hard hitting. I was quite delusional with my whole life at 29. I thought 29-year-olds don't have strokes and yeah, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm okay. But actually I was 18 and a half stone. I was a 40-a-day smoker. I drank myself under the table near enough every single day. I was in a relationship. I was actually married at the time to her, covering up who I am as a person. If you add all of that, I didn't eat properly. I didn't exercise properly. To earn the big bucks that I was earning with the job, I was working 80, 90 hours a week. And when you put it all in the mix, something was going to happen. And for me, this is what happened.
Do you think the years and years of stress and anxiety and everything that you'd experienced, do you think that was a contributor as well as your kind of lifestyle?
Yeah, definitely. They put it down to stress. They couldn't find any blockages or anything like that. And luckily the symptoms that I had, they wore off and they downgraded it to a TIA, which I was so lucky. I remember a guy in the bed next to me in the recovery unit. He was younger than me. People talk about these like eureka moments in your life, and I don't like the phrase eureka moment, but it is a bit like that. It's almost this moment where everything just collides and you're like, something needs to change. You have all this realization. It's weird. But how do you change the way that you've been behaving for 29 years? Your life is built around the people in it, the relationships you have in it. And it's not suddenly like you can change your behavior overnight, but yet there's an issue and something does need to change. So it's almost like you're in conflict, even, a lot more than what you were before. And I think realization is a positive thing, but it was quite negative as well. I knew I needed to come to terms with who I am as a person, a gay man. I knew I needed to tell my ex-wife that I was gay and come out and live the life that I should live. But when you're dealing with the internalized homophobia that you've, been driven into you for 20 odd years, it's tough to do that. But I did. I came out, I made a decision. I thought I've got to get myself back on track. Whatever that track is, I've got to figure it out. And I knew that the first point of call for me was to come to terms with who I am as a person, because I think that's the basis of everything, really. If you're not who you are and you're not genuine in that sense, then everything else doesn't really work.
So once you made that decision, you had this massive tipping point in your life, and you decided that you had to be true to yourself, starting with your sexuality. What happened then? How did you move forward?
Yeah, obviously everything went swimmingly and there were no issues and everything went amazing. Yeah, right. I came out to my ex-wife and we got divorced and I moved out, and unfortunately we don't talk, and that's just the way it is. These things don't always work out, do they? And I think for me, I thought I'd done enough in coming to terms with who I am as a person. Nothing else really changed in my life after I came out and got divorced and moved out. I thought that's quite big. And it was probably about a year went by. I didn't suddenly get fitter. I didn't suddenly get healthier. You wish you do, but the reality of life, you end up back on the same kind of conveyor belt that you were on before, but with a few little changes. And it was actually a friend of mine. We were sat in a pub in South Bristol having a pint of cider, because it's one of your 5 a day around where we live. And I don't know if anyone listening or yourself, Phil, has a friend like this, but a friend that just moans at you, like just constantly moans. They've got nothing positive to say in life. Full well that every time that you see them, they're just going to suck that air out of you almost. And I was that person. I was so negative about everything. And this friend of mine, she just took one look at me and she just said, "Look, shut up." And I was a bit like, "What?" And she said, "Shut up." And I said, "Why?" And she said, you moan about all of this. You had this massive life-changing moment a year ago. What have you actually done with your life since? And again, I don't know if anybody listening has ever had somebody have a go at them, but the natural human response is to put your barriers up and all the excuses to come out your mouth, right? Because that's how it is. And for me, 45 minutes that lasted. She was constantly at me, and I was fighting it off. All the excuses were coming through to the point where I gave up, and I just said, "Fine, what do you expect me to do about it?" And she went, "I'm glad you asked. Why don't you come and join my running club?" To which I'd taken a sip of my pint of cider, by the way, and me and running, I was 18 and a half stone, couldn't run for a bus. So that nearly spat my pint out all over her. And also, if you think back to my experiences of sport at school, a lot of my buddies were sports people, and I'm by any means assuming that's the case everywhere. But in my situation, that was the case. So I would never, ever get myself involved in sport at school. So for suddenly running to be an answer to how I was feeling, it just seemed very foreign. It seemed very out of left field. But I got no more excuses. So I plucked up the courage. I rocked up to this running club. It was a Tuesday night in February. It was absolutely freezing cold. I went in baggy tracksuit bottoms, a baggy tracksuit top. I had my hood up because I think if any of my mates seen me, it was like I was just walking down the shop for milk. But to the front of this running club, this door, it was a pub, and that's where the running club started. I got to the front door, and all those feelings that I had back at school, like they're going to laugh at me, they're going to leave me behind, I don't belong here, there's something wrong with me, they all came back. And somebody opened the door and said, "Are you coming in?" And I don't think my head and my feet were talking to each other, because I took one step, and it's cheesy, I know, but talk about a step that changed my life. I put 50p in the pot that night. I turned around, I saw a sea of runners, and they were those runners, the tall, lanky, skinny ones that, hardly wearing anything, and it's -9 outside, and they got their legs up above their head doing some form of gymnastics. And I'm sat there thinking, what? And I was like scanning the room, trying to find people that looked like me, and spot a group in the corner. I make my way over to them. They were the Couch to 5K group. And I thought, I've heard of this. Unfortunately, though, they were doing the 5K that night. So I took it literally. I went couch to 5K. But I remember coming back, and you get a free pint after your first run at this running club. They put that pint down in front of me, and that thing never tasted so good. But the pain that I felt, and it sounds a bit sadistic and maybe a bit weird to those probably listening, but the pain that I felt, that's what made me go back. Because I think what I'd realized was that it wasn't this overriding love of running that made me go back initially. It was the fact that I felt so numb for such a long period of time. And suddenly the pain I was feeling, albeit not very nice, but I was feeling something. And that fire was just lit. And that started my journey. That started the next chapter of my life, which was completely out of left field.
That's really interesting that the pain was filling a void that you had before. And also the fact that, as you said, that one step, and you were to take many millions of steps, was so significant. And your friend as well, who arguably could be the catalyst.
Yeah, and I think going back to what I was saying before, when I was talking about my second suicide attempt in at uni, I just wanted somebody to help me. And I think what I didn't realize was at the time that my friend, that was somebody helping me. Yes, she was having a go at me. Yes, she was taking me to town and telling me that I needed to shut up and pull myself together. But I didn't recognize it at the time as help. But yeah, that was a big life-changing moment for me. Without that, God knows where I'd be, honestly.
So you start running. What happens next then? I'm assuming it becomes a bit easier after a while.
Well, that's what you hope, right? If it's like with anything in life, there were some good weeks and there were some bad weeks. And it was only 50p a run. So I used to go once a week and then twice a week and then £4 a month. You can't even get Netflix for that, can you? So it's like, and I suppose every time I went, I think for me, it wasn't the running that I was loving. It was the social aspect of it. It was meeting people. It was realizing that actually nobody judged you. Nobody cared your sexuality was or what your background was or what you did for a living. We were just running and enjoying something collectively. And I think that was quite empowering. And still to this day, probably I wouldn't suggest I'm great at running. I just enjoy it. And I think that was what was really clear to start with. I plucked up the courage to run my first half marathon after about 6 months, and that was the Bristol half marathon. And I didn't do so well in that. It was quite slow. It was the year they'd run out of medals as well. So when I crossed the finishing line, there were no medals and I was just gutted. And then I vowed I'd never run again. And I don't know what happened, but I ended up back at the running club the week after and they convinced me to sign up to my first marathon. And obviously I'd learned from my mistakes, which I hadn't. I downloaded the 16-week training program about a month before. And this was the Brighton Marathon in 2013. So what little training I did was done in a freezing cold. And then the Brighton Marathon itself was 30 degrees on the day. So I was not acclimatized. I was stood at our start line thinking, what the hell am I doing? No idea what the next 26.2 miles was going to look like. I didn't feel prepared. I had 40 energy gels strapped around my waist because that's what I thought I needed. You see them strewn on the road in any marathon or half marathon and you wonder who those people are. And it's me. It was me. I drank all the water I could, all the energy drink I could. I nicked all the sweets off the kids at the side of the road. I had a peanut butter sandwich halfway around. And obviously your body has a limit. And that came at mile 19 where it just gave up. I don't know how I got to the end. I really don't. I would like to say that I crossed that finishing line without anything going wrong, but well, it did. I unfortunately face planted on the finishing line and they dragged me off and put a 4 blanket round me. They gave me a bottle of water, which they didn't open the lid from. And after 26.2 miles, your brain doesn't really work. So you sat there just looking at it, thinking, I know what it is, but I don't know what to do with it. And then probably 5-10 minutes, the most magical thing happened. Somebody put a medal around my neck. And what was probably 50p, maybe a quid to the organisers. For me, it was priceless because it symbolised this whole journey that I'd been on for almost a year. I'd been stood at the front door of that running club thinking to myself, I don't belong here. They're going to laugh at me. My heart's going to beat so fast I'm going to die. Because we bring our past experiences into the forefront and things. And it does affect how we put ourselves forward for stuff. But then over the course of like the year, I didn't go from not being able to run to being an absolute athlete. That wasn't the case. I probably shouldn't have finished the marathon, but I did. I got there. I didn't do it properly, but I got there. And this medal symbolized the fact that they couldn't take it off me. And for me, I think I was just hooked. I wanted to keep feeling all of that. So I did. Signed up to my second marathon, went to Amsterdam. Great weekend, great marathon. And then I went and ran 18 marathons all around the world in 2014. Travelled and experienced amazing cities, running marathons. And it was actually during that time that I plucked up the courage to go and talk to somebody about the stuff that had happened to me when I was younger. Because we hear a lot, don't we, about talking about it. Talk about how you feel. Be honest about it. And I'm a bit mixed sometimes when it comes to that advice, because I think we hold on to a lot of stuff for reasons that are personal to us. And I think being vulnerable is sometimes it's a really difficult thing to do for somebody, especially when there's so much emotion attached to this particular thing. So I wasn't one of these people that could just talk about it. Even if an environment was created, I wasn't able to talk about it. I needed something to almost precede it. And I think the journey I went on with my running, what I think it did was it allowed me to almost rid myself of all the negative stuff that I'd been taught. And I got to fill myself with a lot of the stuff that I wanted out of life. And as part of that journey, it gave me the ability to pluck up the courage to go, actually, I'm ready to talk to somebody about this.
And running, long distance running gives you the thinking time. There's a lot of time to work things out. And how did you find the right person to then talk to? Did you try a few first, or?
I was so lucky, Phil. Like, genuinely, I found a counsellor through, it's like an online search directory in Bristol. And she was a trainee counsellor as well, because I couldn't really afford to pay £60 an hour. I think she was £25 an hour. And I didn't know what to expect, but genuinely, she was amazing. But it was like peeling back the layers of an onion. That's the only way I can really describe it. People automatically think that when they go and see somebody or talk to somebody, a therapist, that it's going to get better. It doesn't, to start with, because you almost got to peel away all the crap and all of the stuff that you've built up over the years to protect yourself, to get to that thing right in the middle that you then have to change and have to figure out. So it got worse for me before it got better. But the moment I managed to get to the core reason, I then was able to build everything back up on top. And actually, I'm really happy to say that I dealt with it all. I don't have any emotion or negativity based on what happened to me. It happened to me. It's part of my life. I'm the person I am today because of it. Okay, yes, genuinely, I wouldn't have wanted to go through it, of course, but if we knew about everything that was going to happen in our lives, then that would be great, but we don't. It's how we move forward. And I think for me, running gave me the confidence to be able to do something that nobody else in the world had ever done. Coming up with the challenge, achieving it, raising all the money for the two charities that we wanted to raise the money for. It was life-changing. And obviously, since it's given us the ability to go around the world talking to so many different people about lots of different things. And yeah, I love my life now.
So what, you've just talked about your challenge, but 401 marathons and 401 days. What was the significance of the 401?
I'll be honest with you. It was simply just a case of us rounding up from 365 and adding on for a victory lap. Well, that was it. There was no other logic around it. 365 was the most ever done in the world at the time. There were a couple of claims of more, but we couldn't verify them. So we just simply rounded it up and added one for a victory lap. So
you ran a marathon every day for well over a year.
Yeah. So there was a period of 10 days during where I didn't, because I broke my back, unfortunately. So I had to take 10 days off. So yeah, it wasn't consecutive, but the 10 days off, I think it was day 285. We were up in Aberdeen, ended up having to get the train down to Manchester. I had a scan. They found out I fractured parts of my back. And then my team decided to take me off the road to go and get some therapy and physical therapy. I learned to run again, and then I went back out to where I would have been 10 days later, which was Inverness. Inverness. But instead of running marathons, we decided to add on the 262 miles that we'd missed out on. So I ran ultra marathons then for the next 117 days through, shall we say, some of the flattest parts of Scotland, the Highlands and all of that. Yeah, but I think it sounds crazy what I did. And I'm not going to sit here and say it doesn't. I can't believe it was my life. And we're talking 8 years ago when all this happened. It doesn't feel like it's my life. I couldn't imagine doing it now, But I think at the time, the reasons why we did it was because we wanted to make a difference. We didn't apply for the world record. We broke it, but obviously it doesn't count because we didn't apply for it. They wanted quite a bit of money. And also there were lots of rules and regulations. When you think about running a marathon every day, to break the running a marathon every day record, you think that's all you got to do. Well, no, you got to have this amount of people with you. You've got to have it measured around a running track. I think we had to realize that what we were doing and why we were doing it was more important. And actually, I got to run in 309 different locations all around the UK, within 8 miles of everywhere on the British mainland, from Land's End to John O'Groats. I got to run with 13,500 people who physically came out to run with us. And that wasn't including the tens of thousands of people that were in official marathons that we took part in. These were just people that came out on a day-to-day basis with us.
People listening to this thinking they've run one marathon, or maybe they've run a few. How do you run that many marathons consecutively with a 10-day break because you had a broken back? I mean, it's incredible. How did you get up and do it every day? And I'm sure everyone would like to understand that.
Well, once I figure it out, I'll let you know. I think your body and your mind are an incredible thing. Your body will adapt to what it is that you're asking it to do. And I think it's about making sure your head is right. And I think for me, the therapy I went through, the ability to realize that actually I don't need to fear the person that I am. I'm able to be this person. I think a lot of the energy that I suppose before I used to cover up that, I was able then to focus that in a different way into something else. But yeah, I'm not going to sit here and, on this podcast and tell you that it wasn't hard. It was tough. But I made sure that when we were planning it, that it wasn't just about one motivation. There were multiple motivations. Obviously, I was emotively attached to the charities that I was running for. We were trying to raise £250,000 for 2 anti-bullying charities, Kidscape and Stonewall. But it couldn't just be about the charities every day. And it's the same with work or your day-to-day life. It's never one motivation every day, is it, that drives you? I love to eat. Burning 6,000 calories a day, I could eat what the hell I wanted. That's a big motivation for me. I love my coffee. I like cake, and I could have all of that. I like people. I got to meet 13,500 people. I love to travel. I got to run within 8 miles of everywhere on the British mainland. So on the days where I really struggled, I was able to pull on a different motivation. And I think a lot of it was just really giving myself a break. Because you can imagine it's relentless, and physically and mentally it's relentless. But at the end of the day, all you've got to do is run 26.2 miles every day. How you do that and how you break it down is what got me through.
Do you think the experiences that you went through made you be able to do this challenge? Would you have done it without those experiences? And I guess second part to that question is, are you glad you had those experiences in order for you to have experienced the challenge that you set yourself and achieved?
Yeah, I think hindsight's a great thing, isn't it? And I think obviously I wouldn't have ever wished that I went through the stuff I went through as a kid. But like I said before, we do have a choice. And fortunately for me, my choice was positive. I made something positive out of it. But for every person that does make something positive out of it, there's a load of people that don't get that. And that's why podcasts like this are so vitally important, that we normalize these things, because we all feel them, and we don't have to be ashamed at talking about them. But would I have done what I did if I hadn't gone through what I went through? I'll be honest, I don't know. Genuinely don't know. I'd like to think I would have done, but then also the reasons why I did what I did were so genuine. And I think it's because I didn't want kids to have to go through what I went through. So without my experience, maybe the project would have been very different. And I think maybe that's what connected with people, because we had obviously not all 13,500 people that came out, but we had a lot of people that came out because they were either going through things or had been through things, or they had friends that were going through things. And it almost became a 26.2 mile therapy session. But yeah, I think it would have been a very different project if I hadn't have maybe experienced the things that I did.
And you got incredible recognition for it as well. I mean, as well as inspiring all these people, plus the 13,500, you won some awards, right?
Yeah, just didn't expect any of those. I think we got a Pride of Britain, which was pretty cool. We watch that every year, and you never really expect yourself to be on that stage. And we got a BBC Sports Personality Award, again, not ever. Paula Radcliffe and Tom Daly were stood next to me. I'm stood on the stage with, the three main presenters, and you're sat there, with no millions of people are watching you, and you're thinking, little old me. Yeah, the awards were great, don't get me wrong. And what they've done is obviously helped us build our profile to be able to then help more. But they weren't why we did it, because we wanted to raise the money, and we ended up raising £330,000, which was far more than the £250,000 that we set out. And that went to help support young people in schools all around the country through programs for anti-bullying. And that's what I think I'm most proud of.
Is that what you've been doing since the big challenge?
I've been doing a multitude of things. So I've delivered over 700 talks all around the world to different organisations and schools, obviously on what I've done, and people still want to hear about it, which always surprises me. We wrote a book, which the irony, I've probably read 5 books in my entire life, and I got to write a book. So that was interesting. What else have we done? We set up a national mental health charity, which was a grant-giving charity. So we were supporting smaller community projects with grant funding, but we had to shut that just after COVID. The timing was all off. But I've gone out to America and I've done a second challenge, which we had to cut short because of COVID as well. They didn't deal with it as well as maybe some other countries. And then, just recently, I've started a new job with a big sports charity down in the Southwest. Some big plans there, and I run my own nutritional business now. So I think the difference between me now and me, 12 years ago, when I was 12, 13 years ago when I was 29, is that everything I do now is driven by what I want out of life. For me at 29, I was driven by what everyone else wanted me to do, driven by what I thought I needed to achieve. Whereas now I'm content. I think they use the word congruent. What you feel on the inside is how you feel on the outside, how you show yourself on the outside. And I'm 100%. What you see is what you get. Yeah, I'm happy. I genuinely am.
Ben, I think it's a great note to finish our discussion on. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I mean, incredible. Your achievement is just awe-inspiring. And thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you for listening to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. If you can relate to any of the issues Ben discussed in this episode, or you or someone you know is struggling with their mental health, there are organisations you can call now. For example, the Samaritans in the UK on 116 123. And if you're in the US, you can call the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you want to find out more about Ben's incredible feat, he's written a book called 401, The Man Who Ran 401 Marathons in 401 Days and Changed His Life Forever. And it's available from most online retailers. If you have a story to tell, you think your experience would help others, then please do get in contact either via the website, mid-lifemen.com, or email me at midlifemen01@gmail.com. If you've enjoyed listening, then please do rate and review the podcast and help raise its profile, and we can reach more people who might benefit from the stories shared by my guests. Finally, there's now a book called Men Speak Up, Journeys Through Mental Health, based on stories from the podcast, and it's available to buy on Amazon and from other online bookstores.